Hello, and welcome to the video boss fight guide for the Aivela and Esne encounter in Veteran mode. Aivela and Esne is the second boss encounter in the Gods from the Machine operation, and is an interesting change of pace from Tithe. Tithe has a lot of kind of randomness in terms of the ads and the positioning. A&E is a bit different. It's first of all, there's actually two bosses, so that's obviously a big difference. It also has a number of more clearly defined phases. Where there's an introductory phase that's very straightforward, and then you go through a number of other phases where during each phase you kind of incrementally add on mechanics as you go until you get to a fairly challenging burn phase. This fight requires good coordination. Everybody has something to do. Every DPS has a specific assignment, which is not always the case in hard mode. So I really enjoy this fight. The mechanic this fight's most famous for, which we'll talk about, is the Purification mechanic, which can be very, very challenging for teams that haven't seen it before. But once you kind of get this down, this fight actually is can be very easy to reperform once kind of you get the hang of it. So I think it's a really fun fight. It's interesting to learn. There's a lot of fun stuff going on. And I'm going to do everything I can to tell you kind of everything you need to know to successfully clear this fight and get it on farm as you progress through Gods. So, okay, let's dive in and let's start talking about mechanics. Okay, so let's get a few basics out of the way and then talk about how you set up your team before you even actually pull the fight. So as you can see here, and I'll show you more of a laid out map here in a moment, there are going to be a variety of stuff here sitting on the ground before we get started. So let's talk about team assignment division real quick. You definitely, in veteran mode, have got to have 2 tanks for this fight. You're going to want 2 healers, 4 DPS, so you're going to want a traditional group composition. Your composition in terms of what class of healers, what class of tanks, what class of DPS doesn't really matter a whole lot. I think you could argue that ranged DPS have a little bit of an advantage in the sense that there's going to be later on in the fight, you're going to have the bosses swapping sides. At least for most group strategies, we'll have them swapping sides, and somebody's going to be dealing with the Nexus, and being ranged DPS is a little bit more convenient because of how the Purification beams interact. But it's not necessarily mandatory. You can get by with all melee DPS. That works great. Some melee DPS in particular that have dot spread, that are rotational, can be really, really handy for dealing with countermeasures. So you kind of can bring any group composition in here, and you ought to be able to be successful. One thing you are going to want to do, this is actually a screenshot from when we were short manning it in story mode, but you are going to want to divide up your group in half. So you're going to want one team assigned to be on the north side of the room where Esne will initially spawn. You'll want a tank, 2 DPS and a healer. Then you'll want another group with a tank, 2 DPS and a healer on the south side of the room, which is where Aivela is going to spawn. Okay, let's take a look at this kind of from a top-down view. Okay, so here's just a basic view of kind of the overlay of the platform. You notice there's going to be 8 codices around the room at each point of the diamond, as well as the midpoint of each side. There's going to be the Nexus in the middle. As you saw a moment ago, and you'll see again when we show this live, each codex has an energy beam connecting it to the Nexus, giving it a hardened shield buff that makes it immune to damage. So we have to damage the Nexus to proceed with the fight. So to do that, we have to kill the 8 codices. So the traditional way to do this is just have one person stand next to their codex. Be really, really, really careful that none of the folks in the team use any AoE attacks, because you won't trigger them by walking near them, but if you attack them in any way, that'll start the fight. That's happened many a time, especially when people are still coming into the room, or maybe you're running back and you start the fight before everyone is in there, so be careful. Generally, it doesn't really matter a whole lot where each person stands, although usually the team that's on the north side should stand by codices on the north side, south side, and so on. But doesn't really matter a whole lot. The codices don't do a whole heck of a lot of damage, so DPS should kill theirs pretty quickly. Then they should help the healers and tanks kill theirs. Once all 8 codices are destroyed, the Nexus will become active. Its shield will come down, it'll be damageable, and it'll begin attacking the team. So let's see that real time, and most importantly, let's talk about the Polarity Module that you pick up when you kill a codex. Okay, so let's see an example of the opening sequence of the game. Everyone's got their own codex. Here we go, we're going to attack. Each person's going to attack theirs, and you kind of got a 1v1 duel. I mean, you can't help others. DPS are going to kill theirs first, so I'm on DPS here, so I'm going to get mine down pretty quickly. You notice there should be a little clickable item here on the ground right next to me. So generally I should click that immediately, and I get a temporary ability, which we're going to talk about in a moment. Then I'm going to help kill the healer's codex there, and then there's one left. You can see that energy beam. There's one beam left. We got to kill it, and then the Nexus, and now we're on to the Nexus. So just to make sure it's clear to everyone what you're looking to do, once you kill your codex, you're going to see a clickable item just right in front of it, exactly like in the screenshot with a little yellow arrow pointing at it. You need to make sure you pick that up immediately. Some DPS like to ignore it for a little while, and they'll help kill another codex or two, and then they'll DPS the Nexus, and then they'll go pick it up. During the brief pause, once the codex is pushed and Aivela and Esne come down, you can do that. I usually suggest just pick it up immediately. There really isn't a DPS check or enrage timer you really have to be concerned about. The only thing that's really difficult in this fight from that perspective is the burn phase, and that's more about coordination, more so than actual DPS. So I usually suggest just go ahead and pick it up immediately, get your temporary ability bar. You will not be able to complete this fight in veteran mode without the Polarity Module, so go ahead and pick it up just quickly as you can, and then get on with the fight. Now, when you pick up the Polarity Module, you're going to get a temporary ability bar. I know this is zoomed way in, but this is like the most important part of the fight. You're going to get this temporary ability bar somewhere on your screen based on how your interface is set up and where you want your temporary ability bar. I believe the default is going to be kind of the center, the kind of lower middle center of your screen, typically right above your ability bar, but you can move it in your interface editor wherever you want it. Make sure you know where that is. This is going to be super important. In fact, temporary ability bars are fairly common in most of the fights in Gods. So in A&E, in Nahut, and in Skyva, there are temporary ability bars that pop up. Oh, and in Isaacs as well with Tether. So this is going to be a recurring theme throughout Gods, starting with this fight. So make sure you know where that is. This is going to be super important, and we'll talk about these mechanics in detail. But the overriding principle to this fight is most things that attack you in this fight are going to have a color polarization. They're going to be positive, which is white or blue. Some people call it out differently on the left. And negative polarization, which is going to be red on the right. If something's targeting you that's white or blue, depending on how it perceives to you, then you're going to hit the left button, which is going to grant you positive polarization, and you'll take very little or no damage from that mechanic. If something's targeting you that's red, then you'll hit the right button to tune yourself to negative polarization and take little or no damage. You can, absent a very specific tank mechanic, as an exception. Otherwise, you can change your polarization like once a second, so you can go back and forth as often as you need to. Super important to be aware of where this is, be prepared for it, have it somewhere where you can readily click, or have it hotkeyed even can be super helpful for this fight. Okay, so let's finish off phase one. This is a lot of just kind of prep. Phase one, super easy again. Everyone's going to take your own codex, you're going to DPS your own codex and kill it. You're going to pick up your Polarity Module, and then after you do that, you're going to help clear out any other codices so that these blue energy beams connecting to the Nexus. You can see at the top on my focus bar, it's got that yellow hardened shield buff, has an 8 next to it. As we kill each codex, you're going to see that tick down from 8 to 7 to 6 to 5, eventually down to eventually will be 1, and then when it goes to 0, it'll disappear. That's what makes the Nexus immune to damage, so we got to get rid of the 8 codices. Then we're going to attack the Nexus. The Nexus really only has one mechanic in either story mode or hard mode, which is charge fire. So it's going to generally follows basic kind of aggro principles. It does this defense protocol cast, but that's not really relevant outside of master mode. So it's going to target somebody and it's going to blast them, and then it'll target the next person on the threat table. You'll see it adds a debuff that causes them to take a fair bit of damage. The main thing is this is a conal, so just don't stand in the way of it so that only one person gets hit. Then you get healed up. Once you get the Nexus to 50%, now the fight really properly starts. Aivela and Esne come down. Aivela is going to be on the south side of the room, on the far side from the entrance. Esne is going to be on the north side, right near the entrance. Esne, again, we'll revisit this. Esne is red or negative. Aivela is positive or white or blue if you prefer. And now we've really started the fight properly, and so now let's start talking about kind of the main mechanics. Okay, so the first mechanic let's talk about is Polarized Energy Burst. This is going to be kind of the ability attack that gets spammed the most by Aivela and Esne. It's a short a 3-second cast ability has a very short cooldown. Basically, they're going to attack a random player with a polarized attack. It's going to be each boss applies a different one. It's going to have a small, relatively small circle. It's either going to be white or red. That's an AoE-based attack. If you get clipped by it, then you'll just want to move away from the group and match your color so that you basically won't take any damage. Polarized Energy Burst is introduced as soon as Aivela and Esne come down, and it persists throughout the fight until we get to Overdrive mode at the very end, which is the burn phase, when it gets replaced for a stronger, more powerful version called Overdrive Energy Burst, which is not able to be mitigated. It's important to note that the buffs there on the side, the graphics, those correspond to what goes on your ability bar if you're being targeted. So if you're being targeted by a white circle or blue circle, you're going to see the blue debuff there. If you're targeted by a red circle, you're going to see the red debuff. So let's see this in action. Okay, so here's an example. This is just a screenshot from a various pull. You can see I have Aivela focus targeted, and you can see in the middle of my screen, she's just completed the energy burst cast, and you can see there's a blue circle around a player just to the left of center. That's Cadiel, one of our highly experienced proc tanks. And if you look at the ops frame over there in the top left, you can see that blue graphic as a debuff on his bar, indicating that he's about to be targeted. You can also note, and this is a good time just as a reminder to note graphically, you can tell what color you're oriented to, because you can see Cadiel there has a blue dot above his head. So he's matched blue, which is good because he's imminently about to take damage from Aivela, and he's basically not going to take any damage because he's matched colors. If anybody is in that circle that is red, like you can just see there, I'm matched to red in this particular moment. You want to get out of the way, get out of the AoE. If you're a person that gets the graphic, you'll also want to move away from the group. And circles, I believe, a bit bigger in hard mode. It's fairly large there, as you can see, covers up a decent amount of space, particularly later in the fight when you're dealing with Radiance, which you can see here and we'll talk about in a moment. That matters a bit more in veteran mode. That's basically it, and it's just going to be the exact opposite, where it's a red circle, red debuff, and everything else for Esne's equivalent. Okay, so here's just the equivalent where you can see here I'm in the center of the screen. I'm being targeted by Esne's Polarized Energy Burst, which is red. And so you can also see on the ops frame there, I'm at the bottom left, where this is actually in story mode, but it functions the same way. And you can see that I've got the red debuff, and so I'm just going to stand here, make sure I'm out of the group, which we're shorthanding this. That's pretty easy. And then I'm just going to hit the red. This is actually like shortly after the bosses have come down, as you can see by their health. So I actually waited to hit my polarization until I get targeted by something. And so I'm just going to hit red here and mitigate the damage. So same deal. So this is going to happen a lot. This is going to be the mechanic that tends to target people the most often. And again, match the color. If it's red, click red. If it's white, click white, and you are good to go. Okay, let's talk about another mechanic. Again, this is a mechanic that exists in story mode as well as veteran, but it matters a lot more in veteran mode, is charge fire. So this is going to be a channel beam attack by the glare droids. Unlike the circular telegraph by the Polarized Energy Burst, which is an attack by Aivela and Esne, the charge fire comes from the droids on the side, and it's going to be a long conal from the droid casting it through the player being targeted, and it will move with them, including while it's actually firing. And it'll be polarized. It'll either be a long red telegraph or a long blue telegraph. Again, if you match the color, then you will not take any damage. If you do not match the color, unless you hit a really, really strong defensive or a defensive ability that lets you cheese the damage, like Resilience for Shadows or Force Shroud for Assassins is a great example. Unless you have something like that, if you don't match the color, it's pretty much going to kill you in veteran mode. It's important to note that that we'll talk about in a moment, the glare droids, they alternate polarization, which means healers in particular, one great way healers can help your raid team in veteran mode is by kind of managing your polarization to be opposite of your group so that you get most of these, and then you can stand to the sides and reduce the pressure on your DPS and especially your tanks. But let's take a look at how this kind of looks in a live environment. So this is when Aivela and Esne come down, right after the Nexus is pushed to 50%. And then we're going to see, in place of the codices, we're going to see the droids spawn on the side. There are 4 glare droids and 4 countermeasures. The glare droids are going to be, as I'll show you a graphic in a moment, are going to be at the points of the diamond. So here you can see there's the Polarized Energy Burst. They go out at the same time, so that both Aivela and Esne did it. Okay, so you see there at the right side of the diamond there with the white circle around it, that's one of the 4 glares at each point of the triangle. Now in a moment you're going to see them start casting Charged Fire, which you're going to see this long, narrow telegraph. Anybody who gets it, story mode or hard mode, but it's especially important in hard mode, if at all possible you need to take it to the side. So there you see a red one coming from the back and a white one coming from the far side. You're going to aim those along the sides, that way they're nice and safe. If you're a DPS or whatever and you are near it, it's best to match color even if you're not actually being targeted, just in case it pivots a little bit. One thing you can note here, if you pay attention to the one at the right side there ahead of me, you notice it was blue and now it's white. These alternate polarization, and they target the player nearest them that is the opposite polarization. So this is an important distinction, because if you are a healer, you can notice, you can just see a blue dot there at the bottom of my screen. That's one of our healers who's standing very close to the one at our end of the diamond. And basically, if you notice, if you've been watching this, they've been getting targeted by every single one from the back, because they're just making sure they're watching it. And I'll show you a screenshot in a second where they're matching the color, and they're getting at least one of those every time, which means the rest of us only have to deal with beams from the sides. So let's take a look at this in a slightly different way. Okay, so we're back to our top-down view of the map of the area. So again, the Nexus is, after we get to 50%, it's shielded until we get to the last phase before burn. We have to get Aivela and Esne both below 40%. So it'll be a little bit before we get to that. And then you'll see we had the Codex droids on the side. Those are replaced by either glare droids or countermeasures. As I mentioned a moment ago, glares are at the point of the diamond, and they have an orange little G icon here. And the countermeasures are at the midway points along each side of the diamond. Now the glare droids are the one that use the charged fire. And so what you can do, and again, if you noticed, is that they'll alternate polarization between, they'll glow blue, then they'll glow red. And so what you can do is, if you have your healer on each side, because again, you should kind of divide yourselves into 1 tank, 2 DPS, and a healer on each side, you should have the healer stand relatively close to the glare droid and just be the opposite, which basically means what they do is, if they get targeted by a red, then they will just swap to red, of course, and then whenever it changes colors to blue after it fires, you just don't do anything and just wait, because now you're the opposite color, which means then when it does its blue charge fire beam, it's going to target you with a blue beam. And then you wait until it targets you, and then you swap and match colors so that you don't take damage. And then you stay blue so that when it swaps back to red, it'll then target you with the red beam. And so healers can control the top and bottom glares very, very nicely to make sure that they're always getting those, which is just super, super helpful. And now you're still left with the ones on the sides, the left one and the right one on this map, which are generally then going to tend to target either tanks or DPS. But that's a little bit less dangerous because it's going across the platform, meaning that it's a little bit safer than beams going like across lengthwise across the platform can be very dangerous. So it does help to control at least 2 of those. That way DPS really only ever have to worry about the 2 on the sides. So you don't have to do that, but we found when progging this, when we were trying to learn everything, that just really makes a big difference, especially if you're progging this with an inexperienced group. Having 1 or 2 healers that know how to do that can really, really, really help. But again, same rule applies. If you're targeted by it, match the color and get to the outside. That way you're not moving the beam through the middle. There will be one situation in which you have to let the beam go through the middle. Anytime you maybe you're late recognizing you're the one being targeted, or in that specific situation where you kind of have to stay put, you need to make sure to use your voice comms and call out, I have a red beam going through the middle, watch out. I have a blue beam going through the middle. That way people know that if they see that telegraph, it's not going to move towards the sides, and they just need to either stay the heck away from it, or if they need to get near it, they need to know, hey, I need to make sure I match this color. That way if I do clip into it just a little bit, I'm not going to take ridiculously high damage. Okay, so it's finally time to talk about a mechanic that's new to veteran mode. I mean, all these mechanics matter a whole lot more. You can kind of just blow your way through this in story mode and ignore stuff. But this is new, and this is very, very important. So Disruptor Pulse is a mechanic related to the countermeasure. So we just talked about the glares. Now we're going to talk about the countermeasures. It's a debuff applied by their range attack. They'll periodically ping whoever has aggro on them. And they do very, very little damage in both story mode and veteran mode. But in veteran mode, they apply this Disruptor Pulse debuff. Every individual attack applies 1 stack of this debuff. The stack decreases healing done by 1% up to a maximum of 100% at 100 stacks. And it only takes a few seconds for it to expire. But what basically happens is I'll show you this in a second. The Disruptor Pulse mechanic is such that every time the countermeasure droids reset their aggro, they'll automatically default to aggroing a healer, because no one generally is going to be directly attacking the countermeasure droids. And if there are 4 of them, so if all 4 aggro to the 2 healers, they're just going to go up really, really, really quickly. And the burst damage potential in this fight can be very dangerous, especially for tanks. And so, if you have your healers at regularly getting up to 20, 30, 40, 50 stacks, then they get to 50 stacks, they're doing half the healing, which makes it very difficult to keep up with. So this is an important mechanic that you need to kind of strategize for. So let's talk about how we plan for this. So let's pick up right as Aivela and Esne are about to come down. Now the simplest way to do this, there are 4 countermeasures. There are 4 DPS, so each DPS gets their own countermeasure. So I'm going to take the one here. I'm on Esne, and I'm going to take the one just to the right of where I'm standing. I'm kind of standing equidistant. Now I'm on a Vigilance Guardian, which is one of the best possible specs for this fight, at least as relates to this mechanic, because every time I hit Vigilant Thrust, if you watch, you'll see the fly-in text damage, so that I'm clipping both the boss and the countermeasure, which means I just do my normal rotation, and I'm going to automatically clip the countermeasure, and I'm going to do some damage. I'm going to spread my dots, and I'm going to make sure just through that rotationally, I'm going to keep that thing aggro. You notice if you watch closely, that one is shooting me directly there, the one right next to me, so it's on me, and you can see I'm picking up stacks. I'm at 16, 17, 18 whatever stacks as I'm building up. So if I use a med pack or focus defense, it's not going to do as much, but that's okay, because you notice our healers are at 0 stacks, and that's very important. And so I'm just going to do that rotationally. Now, if I'm a DPS player that doesn't have a dot spread or an easy AoE that can clip both, then what you do is every time they reset aggro, and there's a little audio cue I'm going to show you here in a second, then you just swap to yours, throw out a taunt. An individual taunt may not always be enough. Usually it's like hit it with like 1 or 2 GCDs, then throw out a taunt, and then you'll get its aggro. Now, one thing it's important to note, as you may have noticed here, the blue shield around them here during the transition happened earlier during that. If you can actually kill them, in which case they shield and then basically heal to full and then resume. So there's no real benefit to doing massive damage. You just want to do enough damage to keep them on you, and then that's it. That's all your goal is just keep them off the healers. If you're tanks, anytime, since the bosses are fairly far apart, they can't move during the early phases of this fight, it's a good idea to be listening for that audio cue and when they reset aggro, and then throw out your AoE taunt can help the DPS a little bit, especially if you have DPS that really have to swap to it more often. That can help as well. Just listen closely. In a few seconds, you're going to hear kind of a boom sound. Okay, so hopefully everyone heard that little audio whoom cue. It'll recur throughout the fight. I encourage you to listen for it as we see more of these clips, and then we'll do a full kill video at the end. There's also a visual cue. This is very, very tightly zoomed in, so it's very poor quality. But you can see there's this kind of orange row of lines, kind of almost shielding kind of looking effect that clips over them. That's also a visual cue that goes along with the audio cue, indicating that basically they're resetting their aggro. And so it's usually a good idea to have somebody responsible. There's lots of different callout assignments in this fight. One of them that can be handy, especially for like a DPS player, since there's usually not quite as much that they have to contend with apart from this countermeasure mechanic, at least early on, to note that and say, countermeasures resetting, pick up aggro on your countermeasures, whatever. It's also, if you're a tank, it's a good cue to know that, hey, give it a couple seconds, throw out your AoE taunt as you see that, and then you'll pick up aggro. This mechanic, as I recall, happens about every 40 to 45 seconds or so, so it doesn't happen super often, but it is important that you pick up on it. Obviously, if you're the ops leader, or especially if you're a healer and you notice yourself picking up stacks, make sure to call it out. You will be able to visually identify which ones you have aggro on, because you'll be able to see it shooting you. It's worth noting glare droids will also shoot at you if you have their aggro, which should happen, but those don't pick up stacks. It's only the ones along the kind of the middle points of each side that you need to worry about again, which are the countermeasures. Okay, so now let's talk about another new ability to Veteran Mode. This is a tank mechanic called Remote Access. So this is a both cast ability by Aivela and Esne, and it places a debuff on the player. It's going to be either the icons there on the left, the blue icon for the tank holding Aivela, the red icon for the tank holding Esne. It's a 1-second cast ability that you should be looking for that has an 18-second cooldown. The ability places a 30-second debuff. The debuff is that graphic there to the left that you can see on the targeted player. So it's an important thing to note, the cooldown is more than half the duration of the debuff, which means you can't, the debuff lasts too long to just ignore it. You have to deal with it. And so what happens is, it's basically a tank swap mechanic. When remote access happens, both tanks need to swap. And if you don't do that, then there's going to be another mechanic where the boss will then hit you with Spike, which is a slightly different debuff. I'll show you in a second. And if you get hit with Spike, then you can't, then your Polarity Module is not going to work, and you're not going to be able to swap to whichever color you're spiked on. So if you're spiked with red, you won't be able to select red. Now, in the early parts of this fight, this isn't necessarily super, super dangerous, but once you get into dealing with the Purification, the Wiper Beam phase, this is basically, if you get spiked going into a Purification cycle, it's basically a death sentence unless you are really, really, really lucky and really on the ball about defensives and how to cheese things. So this is just the tank swap mechanic, basically. This mechanic is designed to occur simultaneously. It isn't always quite synced up, so it is important to note sometimes you do have a little bit of time before you swap. I'll show you how to do this in a second, but it's going to be the thing that the main thing tanks need to pay attention to. Okay, so here's just the information on Spike. It's a similar looking graphic, slightly different, a little louder of a graphic in terms of blue and red. Again, now this is a little bit different. It's also 1-second cast ability, 12-second cooldown, but the debuff lasts 15 seconds. So yet again, you can't wait for it to fall off. Whenever you get hit with Spike, you can't swap your polarity to that color. So again, if you get targeted by a mechanic of that color, you can't swap to it, and then you're going to take lots of damage or maybe die. So this is to be avoided at all costs. Okay, so let's pick up again right as Aivela and Esne are just going to come down. We're going to kind of go through most of this fight until burn while we talk about it, but note there'll be some other mechanics we still need to discuss. So I'm picking up on Esne. Important thing to note here, I have Aivela focus targeted. I highly, 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 highly recommend you focus target the other boss and be familiar with how to do your target swap, which is just going to be Alt-F is the default to set it up. And if you hit Alt-F again, it'll swap your current target and your current focus. So there's remote access, went out for both. So then I Alt-F, and so Aivela and Esne swap, so my target automatically swapped to Aivela, and I run across the room or leap across the room and taunt. Now, later on when we get to Phase 2, you're going to need to be a little careful about the path you take because of another mechanic we haven't talked about yet, but that's it. I'm just going to swap. The Alt-F makes it super easy because there's so much junk going on here. So you just saw remote access again, so we're going to swap. You can't just tab target because there's 8 different items around the room between the 4 countermeasures and the 4 glares, plus there's the Nexus in the middle, and then there are the 2 bosses. So tab targeting is not reliable. Even click targeting can be a little problematic because of the positioning. So I highly, 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 highly suggest you get comfortable with focus target, and just as soon as they come down, attack your boss, build up some aggro, and then set up your focus target. Now you notice there we pushed one boss first when we got to 71%. So you can push one and the other still be active and remote access still happen, in which case you may still have to swap. Even if one of you is swapping off to a boss that's shielded, you still have to follow those mechanics. And so now we're in the second phase, which has 2 extra mechanics that we're going to talk about in a moment, but you notice remote access is still happening. You'll notice there's this light yellow energy beam there I'll talk about in a moment, but during this phase you kind of want to go around a little bit. It is important to note that since Aivela and Esne are not mobile yet, you can taunt before you're actually even there, as long as you're in range. And so if for some reason the 2 get desynced a little bit, you can taunt a little further away and be okay. So there's all these energy beams, but again, we're just swapping on remote access. That's the key. Keep on the lookout for it. You should see your own cast bar on your target cast bar for the one you have, and your focus target cast bar for your co-tanks boss, and you need to be watching. Both of those need to happen when you swap. If they get really, really badly desynced, then you sometimes may need to call out a swap a little bit differently, where one of you taunts and briefly holds aggro on both until remote access happens. Okay, so we haven't really talked about this too much yet, but once we get below 41%, the bosses are mobile. So from this point onward, the usual approach is to have the tanks not move. So their remote access happens as we go into the wiper beam phase, which we'll talk about. And us tanks do not swap sides, so we just cross taunt. So I Alt F to swap to Aivela, I taunt her, and I stay put, and she comes to me. And so from this point onward, until we get to the final burn, we're not going to swap sides anymore now that the bosses are mobile, and we're just going to cross taunt, and then the bosses themselves are going to swap sides, as you saw, and as you'll see again in a moment. This is, in my opinion, the simplest way, because it helps the tanks maintain their positioning when you're dealing with the Purification beam mechanic and having to orient yourself. Swapping sides can make it very confusing, and so we found this to be a lot easier. So again, here they are swapping again, and off we go. So you don't have to do it this way. We found it to be the easiest to reperform under pressure and the most consistent, but to each their own. But again, that's remote access. It's just something you have to watch for. It's very challenging early on when you're trying to watch other mechanics. That's really the only thing that's tank specific, but with everything else going on, especially if your ops lead is a tank, can take a little bit of confusing, but just call it out every time we say remote or swap, and just get in the habit of saying it every time until it really does become second nature. Once you get the hang of it, that part's pretty easy, but it's a faster paced tank swap than just about any other fight in the game, which does take a little getting used to. Okay, so we're finally past the first phase of A&E. Once we get them to 72%, each one shields. Once they both get, it's below 72, so when they hit 71, once they both are shielded, you move to Phase 2. Phase 2 introduces Radiance, which is present in Story Mode and Veteran Mode, and that's going to be the big colored circle that's centered around each boss. They'll cast it at the beginning of each phase. So once they go below 71, they'll cast it to enable it. When they drop to whatever is 40%, and you get to the next phase, it'll disappear briefly. Then they'll cast it again as they enter that phase as well. And it's just a very large circle. If you're standing in it, you'll take fairly nominal damage. Even in Veteran Mode, it's not super high, but it does add up. So if you have the group, if everybody's standing in the circles and they're not matching the color appropriately, I think when we were looking at Star Parse, it tended to be somewhere around like 1,200 to 1,500 damage taken per player, or somewhere in that ballpark, which it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you add that up over 8 players, that's like 10,000 damage taken, which that's a lot. That's like most of one healer's output, which means if you're being very poor about managing this mechanic and mitigating it when you can, that's going to dramatically increase the burden on your healer just to keep up with the steady damage, let alone be prepared to burst heal for burst damage. So this is a mechanic that you don't have to be perfect about, but you do need to pay attention to it as much as you can. Basically, anytime there's something else going on, deal with the something else. But then as soon as you hit a moment where you're kind of I'm just tanking the boss, I'm just attacking the boss, or I'm just doing my normal healing, spend a moment and make sure the dot above your head is the same color as the big old circle you're standing in, and that'll really go a long ways. Healers can also be helpful for this at times, because there are moments in time where they'll notice if they're having to heal someone a lot, and they'll notice, hey, there's 3 blue dots and 1 red dot standing next to Aivela. That red dot needs to be blue because Aivela is blue, Esne's red. So if you're near that boss, you need to match the color. It can also be a little tricky for tanks, because as you saw a moment ago, tanks are going back and forth, which means once Radiance pops up, that means they're going to have to be swapping their color matching even more often. So just to illustrate that concept, here's a brief screenshot where this is actually later in the fight. We're getting ready to go into the Wiper Beam Purification phase. But notice how we're all positioned, where there's the blue circle around Aivela where the group I'm standing with is at. Then Esne's on the far side. Now the bosses are mobile here, so we've actually moved them around a bit. But the basic concept, they're only each a little bit to the side of their normal spot. So this still, I think, is a good example. Notice how all 4 of us on my side have a blue circle. We're all positive polarization, which is matching Aivela. And notice how we're all standing just outside of the red circle. That's important because it means we're not taking damage from Aivela's radiance because we've matched that color, and we're not standing in the red circle. If you're standing in overlapping blue and red circles, which is generally anywhere in that middle area of the room, you're going to take damage no matter what you do because you can only match one color at a time, which means from 71% down, if the circles are not overlapping, and there's maybe one or two instances where they might be, you generally are going to want to stand on kind of the back half of your end of the diamond, because the circles are usually going to be positioned fairly similarly to you see here, where if you stand just a little outside of Aivela or Esne, you'll be in their circle but outside of the other boss's circle. And so again, if you get targeted by a glare, which is the long narrow beam, match that color first. That's top priority. Or purification, as we're dealing with here. If you get targeted by the polarized energy burst, the somewhat smaller AoE individual attack, match that color. Otherwise, when you're not dealing with any of that, try to match the color of the boss you're targeting and make sure you're standing just positioned like you see here, where you're not standing in overlapping circles. Your healers will really appreciate it. Okay, so now let's talk about a new mechanic that's introduced in Phase 2, or I guess you call it Phase 3 if you count the Nexus phase at the beginning. But once we get Aivela and Esne, after they shield at 71%, until they shield at 40%, there's a new mechanic called Synergy Protocol in Veteran Mode. I'm going to show you an example of how this works, both live and in a screenshot to make it clear. What's going to happen is periodically the Nexus is going to channel a yellow kind of lightning-looking energy beam towards Aivela and Esne, and it takes place over 24 seconds, and there is a brief cooldown. And there's also a brief delay. So once they unshield at 71%, there's about 8 seconds, probably about right. There's a brief delay before Synergy Protocol starts. Then after the channel finishes, there's a brief pause before it starts again. Now, when this happens, if the yellow energy beam Synergy Protocol touches Aivela or Esne, it gives them very, very large buffs to their damage dealt and damage resistance per stack. And if you ignore this mechanic and just let Aivela and Esne pick up 24 stacks of the buff, then you're going to wipe. Your tanks will not be able to take the damage. The buff is too powerful and it lasts for too long. So you have to deal with this. So the way you do that is you have typically a DPS, should be the person doing it, who is going to stand in between the Nexus and Aivela, and in between the Nexus and Esne. And then what's going to happen is they're going to pick up stacks of a system shock debuff, which I'll show you in just a moment. And that's going to cause them to take some damage, but it's not really a big deal. They'll take some damage from System Shock, and because they'll be standing in overlapping radiant circles like we talked about, they'll take some extra damage from that. So they are going to need some extra heals. It's a good time to pop a decent long duration defensive cooldown. But you want them taking it, and so that the bosses aren't buffed. Like you have to deal with this. This is a DPS specific mechanic. So here we go. This is the debuff, exact same icon, thankfully. And so you're going to get 1 stack per tick of the Synergy Protocol beam, and you're going to take internal damage based on the number of stacks. A full channel is going to be 24 stacks. Important thing to note, and this is very, very important, is if you go more than about a second without picking up more stacks, then you'll get a second debuff called Mortal Frailty, which I'll show you in just a second. Once you get Mortal Frailty, if you pick up any more stacks of System Shock, you will die. So here's Mortal Frailty. The debuff looks like Death Field for any Madness Sorks out there. So it's a 16-second debuff. And again, Synergy Protocol is a 24-second channel with a 32-second cooldown, which means once the channel ends, you have 8 seconds until the channel starts again. And this debuff lasts for 16 seconds. What does that mean? It means the same 2 DPS cannot handle Synergy Protocol on their own because they'll still have this debuff, which means if the same 2 DPS stand in the middle, they'll take the first channel, no problem. Then the second channel, the first time they get hit by it and pick up a stack, they'll instantly die. So what this means is your DPS have to swap. So in an 8-man team, you have 4 DPS. So 1 DPS each from the Aivela team and Esne team go stand in the middle, go stand in between their boss and the Nexus. They take a full channel. As soon as they get to 24 stacks, the beam should go away. They should pick up this debuff, and then ideally they should be the ones to call out DPS swap. It's important to clarify because tank swaps are usually happening about the same time. So it's usually make sure, however you're calling it out, it's clear what you're supposed to be doing. And then those 2 DPS step away from the middle, and the other two DPS step in. There's a little bit of cushion there, and then they take their stacks. And if you need a third channel, a third time through synergy protocol, which you may, especially early on progging this fight, then the first pair of DPS, their debuff will have dropped off, and they step back in, and then they take their turn. And you just rinse and repeat, alternating until you push through this phase and the bosses get to 40% and they shield. Once you get past that second phase of Aivela and Esne, then this mechanic goes away. You only have to deal with it during that time. Okay, so we're going to show this to you live in a second, but I love screenshots because there's not a million things happening. It's easier to focus on what's going on. So you can see here a screenshot where I'm standing in the middle. I'm a DPS player in this particular pull. And again, I'm just standing in between the Nexus and I'm DPSing Esne. So I'm standing in between those two. And you can see the yellow beam is hitting me. It's not touching the boss. You can see my fellow DPS player on the opposite side is doing the same thing. And so we're executing this mechanic correctly. We're up to, it looks like, about 18 stacks of the system shock, so we're close to a full channel. And again, I'm just standing here doing my normal thing, DPSing the boss, trying to get through the phase as quickly as I can. I am taking a fair bit of damage, both from picking up stacks of system shock, as well as the radiant circles overlap here, as you can see. So even though the rest of my team is standing outside of the blue circle, and although a couple of them are blue, and they probably need to swap since they're near Esne, so perhaps shame on them a little bit. But I'm standing in the middle of overlapping, so it kind of doesn't matter which color I'm matching, because no matter which color I match, I'm going to take damage. So I'm going to take a bit more. It's a good time to pop for me as a Guardian. If I get below 70, I could hit Focus Defense. Or just my healers are going to need to know, whoever's picking up those stacks, they're going to be taking more damage. So they're going to generally be your next priority after dealing with tanks as they take burst damage. That next up is going to be whichever two are picking up those stacks. You'll take a little bit of recurring damage after the stacks, after you stop accruing stacks, but generally by that point you can step back out of the radiance where they're not overlapping, and that'll help a fair bit. Okay, let's see this live. Okay, so we're picking up here right before we're about to push Aivela and Esne to 71%, and they shield, which finishes the first Aivela Esne boss phase. Again, countermeasures bubble up, and so then we reset everything. They're going to cast Radiance, as you see here. There's this graphical indicator where it's going to be. They finish the cast, and then those circles are just going to be there, and now they're active. The countermeasures are active. We need to pick up aggro on them, but your two DPS need to go stand in the middle, like I am here, and my fellow DPS, and boom, there's the timing. So you have about 5, 6, 8 seconds to get positioned. Tanks are still doing their remote access. If you saw that cast, notice how they're going around. You don't want your tank or any other player to step between you and the Nexus, because if they do, they could pick up a stack of system shock, which is bad, and that could cause you to pick up mortal frailty. It has absolutely happened learning this fight where I inadvertently got too close to a DPS. I took a stack, and then I got out of the way, and they got the debuff, and then they got another stack, and they just instantly died, and it was bad. You see here, my stack's gone, so I stepped out. I'm out of the Radiance, out of at least one of them. And then the other DPS swaps, so now our other two are standing in the middle, and they're taking their stacks. And we're just going to go back and forth and back and forth. Keep an eye on your Radiance, and we have really good DPS. So notice we pushed Esne before we even finished the second synergy protocol. When you're first progging this fight, it's a bit easier now with stacks of Veteran's Edge. So DPS overall is a bit higher than it used to be. So 2-ish is probably about right. If your DPS is low, you might need a third. But anyway, you just go back and forth and coordinate it. It's almost impossible, I think, to do this without at least part of 2 channels. But there you go. And that's Synergy Protocol. Okay, so now the real fun begins. We're bosses shield up at 42%. And now we're going into the Wiper Beam phase, the Purification Beam phase. Most groups will get to this point relatively quickly, especially with the benefit of Veteran's Edge, meaning that a lot of these earlier phases you can burn through pretty quickly. Notice Countermeasure still exists. You'll have to deal with those. Radiant still exists. The Overdrive Energy Burst still exists. Charged Energy Burst. But here we deal with the Wiper Beams. There's 4 beams, 2 blue, 2 red, going across the room, sweeping across the room. So you have to not only match colors, you have to match back and forth colors. So this can be really, really tricky because you're still dealing with all these other mechanics. Again, this fight is kind of incremental, layering on extra mechanics. We thankfully don't have to deal with Synergy Protocol, but that's about the only one that goes away. We still have to deal with remote access, so tanks still have to swap. We've got all this crap to deal with, and then we've got these Wiper Beams, and here we go again with Wiper Beams. sweeping across the room that we have to dodge. And how do we deal with that? How do we predict it and call it out is very difficult for teams as they're seeing this fight for the first time. So you've really got to be really careful about how you're dealing with it here. If you're watching closely there in this example, I actually did not follow the mechanic correctly, but thankfully was still able to survive. So let's talk about how this works. We'll go through it slowly, and then we'll see it live a few times and try to help it make as much sense to you as possible. So the first thing you're going to notice is this telegraph. It's going to happen pretty darn quickly after you begin this next phase once they shield after 42. And each glare is going to target a beam towards another glare, towards an adjacent one, if you want to call it that, towards, like you see here. And then they're going to telegraph it, and they're going to sweep across the room. Now, they can alternate directions, and any of them can be any particular color. The only rules are that you'll always have 2 blue and you'll always have 2 red. Apart from that, the directionality can be either direction, so in this particular case, each glare is basically targeting the glare to its left. So the one behind me is targeting the one on the left, and then the one on the right is targeting the one behind me, and so on. So they're kind of directionally, they're pointing in, I guess it would almost kind of be like a clockwise direction, or it could be the opposite. And in this particular case, the left side beams are blue, the right side beams are red. It could be the opposite, or it could be the beams on my half of the room could be blue, and the beams on the opposite half could be red, or vice versa. So there are actually 8 combinations for how this can work, which can be confusing when you first see it. And so the thing to think about is there's a few things we need to bear in mind. So first thing to point out, even though the angles that these have to follow to sweep across the room are different, they all meet at the exact same point in the middle. So at this particular point, all of them are shooting their beams basically directly through the Nexus as they sweep across the room. So this is a key point because it means that the total time it takes them to sweep across the room is going to be the same, even though if you just look at the angles, you can see that the beams on the sides have to rotate faster because they have to cover a much wider angle than the ones at either end of the diamond. And so this is going to inform our strategy of how we deal with it. As much as it's painful to bring up geometry for some, this is kind of a key element to how we form a strategy to deal with this mechanic. Okay, so this is the example alignment we showed a second ago, and here's kind of the solution. So again, blue on the left side, pointing kind of in a clockwise direction around the room, red on the right side. So the beauty to this is that all you really have to do is call out left or right. There's always going to be a solution where your team either moves left or moves right to intersect the beams. The general goal here is to minimize the number of times you have to swap colors, because conceptually you could go through, like, all 4 of these beams are going to cross through you. There's no way to avoid that. So you could just run around like crazy and just be hitting buttons, and you can survive that way. You absolutely can. But it's tricky, it's difficult, and you're not going to be getting much else done while you're doing that. So what we ideally want to do is identify of the 2 red beams and 2 blue beams, which one is going to kind of intersect nearest me first. And so in this particular alignment, what I know is that the red beam on the right side glare, the one that's kind of pointing towards me, is going to sweep very quickly across the room because it has a wider angle, which means I know that one's going to get to me very, very quickly. And so that's the one, that's kind of my key to see here's how I need to move. So what we're going to do is we're going to move a little bit to the right to move nearer that glare, and we're going to match red. And then that beam is going to sweep through us pretty quickly, and then the one on the far side that's already pointing towards us is then going to rotate as well. The idea being here that we're going to move through the X. So the idea we are going to match red. We're going to move through the wiper beams, through both red beams. Once we're safe from those, we then know once both of them have passed through us, we know we don't have to worry about them. Then we can match blue. and then we can just kind of hang out there and wait for the blue beams to get to us, and we can keep DPSing whichever boss we have. Again, Aivela and Esne are going to be swapping sides back and forth during this phase, so who knows which of those bosses we're actually going to have near us, but we know once we get to that point, we can let the first color beams go through us, then we can swap to the other color, and we know that we're safe. We can just hang out there and let the other beams come through us, and then we can reset once those are gone. That's all we're going to have to do. The other beauty of this is for the other side's team, they're going to mirror the movement. They also are going to move to their right, except they're going to go to blue, let the blue beams go through them, then they're going to match red and let the red beams go through them. So let's see this in real time, but a little slower speed to make it a little easier to follow. Okay, so here we go again. We're going to move to the right. So I know I need to match red, so I'm going to move to the right. I'm the tank here, so I'm going to pull the boss way over to the right. You notice the telegraphs around these beams. That's the danger. It's not just the beam. I need to be outside of those telegraphs. So now we're safe. I can match blue. We're going to stay right over here. We know that we're safe. Everyone is going to swap to blue, and we're just going to hang out here, wait for the beams to cross through us. I'm moving ahead a little early to get the boss position back in kind of the normal position, but ideally you would kind of wait for the beams to swipe through you. And we did have one person die there, unfortunately, but that's the basic concept. So let's see this again. Okay, so here's another alternative where my half the room's blue, the other half's red. What am I going to do? Again, the one thing I know is that the beams on the sides are going to move faster across the room because of the wider angle. So in this particular case, I can look at it and say, you know what I think is going to happen. I know that beam on the right, the blue one's going to move across my side of the room very, very quickly. And it's going to do so faster than the red beam on the far side. And I know the red beam on the left side is going to take forever to get to us. So in this particular case, my instant read is that's the one I'm looking at is the side beams. The side beams tell me that blue is going to be sweeping across my platform, my side first. So in this case, I know I'm going to want to match blue, and the other blue beam is on the left. So in this case, I'm going to call out left. And for my half the room, I know I'm going to need to match blue and move to the left to move through that X we talked about. All right, and here we go. Here's the map, and yep, that's the answer. Because again, the side beams move faster across the room. So that's the read you have to make, is between the left side and the right side, which of those is going to sweep across me first? Well, I know the right side is going to do that. That's my color. And then that tells me where's the other color, the other beam of that color, which is pointing to the left. That one's going to move slower, so that's the one I need to move towards. So in this particular case, I know that I need to move left, which means we're going to move to the left. Again, we're going to move through the X, is the way our team always talked about it. Move past it to make sure you're outside of those telegraphs, which again is a bit wider than you would think. Make sure you're all the way past it, stand still, then you're going to, in this particular case, my team's going to then swap to red, and we're going to wait for the red beams to get to us. The opposite team is going to do the opposite. They're going to move to their left. They're going to match red until those beams are past them. Then they're going to swap to blue. Let's see it in real time. All right, so just like we saw before, this is in about half speed. Again, I know that from this directionality, I know I need to move left. So we're going to call out left. We know in my team we need to match blue. Notice that the polarized energy burst goes out during this phase. Usually it's triggered so that it lands about a split second after you get to the safe spot. So ideally you want to move really, really quickly to the far wall so that you're safe. And then you can match the polarization of that circle, which is typically going to be the opposite. So this part can be a little bit tricky where even when you're executing the mechanic correctly, you don't want to have the whole group stacked with that polarized energy burst. So it's important to get positioned as quickly as you can so that if you need to match the color of that AoE, you can do so safely. That being said, I want to be really, really, really clear. You've got to survive the purification beams. If that means you have to eat a polarized energy burst circle in the face, then that's what you do, pop a defensive. A few things otherwise you can do is like if you have Mad Dash or Blade Blitz, or if you have Resilience or Force Shroud, there are some defensives that can let you cheese the damage from Purification Beams, but be really, really careful, especially in the case of Mad Dash or Blade Blitz, because you might cheese the damage but then leap to your death, so don't do that. Okay, so let's see this whole phase in real time, live, from a tank's point of view. Again, we're swapping sides up to this point on remote access. From this point on, we're going to leave the boss. We're going to stay on our side, and we're going to make the bosses swap sides because they're mobile. And so, again, same deal. Just want to see you see a couple cycles of these, and let's talk about kind of the pace and the timing. Again, you do need to make sure you pick up your countermeasures. Again, you've got the Purification Beams are the top priority. So even if that means a DPS, maybe loses track of their countermeasure for a few seconds, Ideally, you pick those up. It's where you have to listen for the audio cues. So usually if you get through this cycle, you get the boss reposition, and you tell DPS, hey DPS, pick up your countermeasures if you need to. So you see a couple folks, you see they're spread out and tagged there as extra just to make sure. And now we're kind of set. We're continuing to DPS the boss. Now it is going to be important to time your push to this phase, because if you get any boss below, either of them below 8%, you're going to push to burn phase. You don't want to do that till you're prepared. So you got to keep an eye on the boss health. We're doing another purification. We're moving right, so we get past. See the telegraphs there, the beams. You got to be outside of those. Then we match the color for the next cycle. And we just let them come through us, and no problem. Getting the call out quickly and accurately is a huge help. Ideally, you'd want somebody that doesn't otherwise have a lot of call out responsibility to just like that be their thing, like that be the only thing they're really responsible for calling out. That way they can focus on really getting those down. And also, it's for the most part, it's better if you're not sure which way to move. It's better to just wait and get the call out right than like get it wrong. At least that's been my experience. But again, here we're moving right. We have to move a little further up to be safe, and then we're going to match. My team's going to match to blue, no problem. And here we go. Now we're getting the bosses low. Aivela's at like 12. Esne's also getting relatively low, and then we're going to push to burn phase. So let's see how that works, and then we're going to talk about the mechanics. This is kind of a confusing phase. Now, one of the things that's going to be important is dealing with the Nexus. If you notice there, now there's a clicky there in the middle because we killed the Nexus. And now one boss is shielded, and so now they're casting this Overdrive mode, which we're going to talk about in a second. The key here is pushing them at the right time so that you can break this shield, and then we kill the boss. Here we're going to kill Esne first. We're going to get her down. Notice the other boss is shielded. We're still dealing with purification beams. Plus there's this funky other colored circle going out. And we only have one boss, which is great, but there's a lot of damage. Notice that one of our healers is getting some stacks from the countermeasure there. So this is just, the burn phase is very, very chaotic. So I just want you to see it in real time first. And this is actually a relatively clean kill. And there's still a lot of crap going on. And then we're going to talk about mechanics, and then we're going to see it again in a little slower fashion to talk through it. So here you notice the Aivela shielded up. We broke her shield. Now we're just going to burn her down and just race to the finish, see if we can kill her before Purification, and we can. So huzzah. Okay, so the mechanic you saw there, that funky looking shield around the bosses, is called Empowered Shield. This is the buff for it that they get on their bar, and it's triggered when they reach 7% health. This is hard mode only. The shield does not exist in story mode. And so in veteran mode, when they reach 7% health, when they go below 8, they shield. The only way to break it is through a temporary ability called the Disruption Pulse ability, which is via a temporary ability kind of device that you gain from killing the Nexus. If you're watching the video, I tried to call it out. You notice the Nexus died and went away, and then there was a little clicky on the ground, just like the little clicky you used to pick up your Polarity Module. Whoever picks that up gets a temporary ability, which I'll show you in just a moment, and they can then click that ability, which starts a 4-second cast ability that then will break this shield. Now the timing and pace for this is really, really important. Let's talk through the mechanics, and then let's talk kind of how these pieces fit together, because the strategy for dealing with this mechanic, once you get past Purification and everyone knows kind of how to call it out and the positioning and the timing for dealing with that, then the second big hurdle to get a consistent clear on this fight is knowing the pace and the timing for dealing with this mechanic. Okay, so for your reference, here's just a quick screenshot. This is what the graphic looks like when the Empowered Shield goes up. At that point, they cannot be damaged until you bring down their shield with the Disruption Pulse ability. Okay, so just here's a graphic. The graphic there on the left, that's the actual icon. So you'll have the Polarity Module, the white and the blue and the red buttons that you normally had. Then you'll have this one will be added to the right. So it'll be the rightmost of 3 abilities. You click it. It's you can't cast it while moving, so don't move. And hit the button. It's a 4-second cast ability. It has a 24-second cooldown. Once it's cast, it will break the shield of whichever boss you're targeting, and then will enable you to kill them. So let's talk about Overdrive mode. Overdrive mode is what makes the burn phase so difficult because of the buff it provides to Aivela and Esne. Now, it's an 8-second cast ability that doubles their damage, heals them for 7.5% of their health, and enables them to use the Overdrive Energy Burst attack, which is a more powerful AoE attack versus the charged burst we saw earlier in the fight, except that it cannot actually be mitigated through using the Polarity device. And the heal is the big part, because you want this burn phase to be as short as you can get it to be. before you just get overwhelmed with damage. And the key is getting the first boss down quickly. So the first one you push to 7%, if it then heals and basically doubles its remaining health, it's going to be very difficult to survive because the two bosses, when they're both up, do so much damage. And when the boss is stunned, it's really not doing that much damage. So the way that this works is it can be triggered by two things. One is whenever you kill the Nexus. So if you kill the Nexus early, both bosses are going to cast Overdrive mode, and you can't. There's nothing you can do to stop it. The only way to interrupt the cast is if they're shielded, and then you break the shield. That interrupts the cast. So it's all about triggering the shielding at the right time so that you can interrupt it. Or when you push them to 7%, they're going to shield and then start casting it. So the proper order to do this is that you want to, get the boss low. And so when you get the boss to about 9 or 10%, you want to kill the Nexus. You ideally want the Nexus to die first, so that the person who is going to handle breaking the shield has time to pick it up, get that ability bar on their icon, and get ready. And then you have, after you kill the Nexus, you have 8 seconds to push the boss to 7%, which will then cause them to break their cast Overdrive mode and put up the shield. And then you just break the shield, and you have 8 seconds for them to cast Overdrive mode again. And then the Disruption Pulse is a 4-second cast, so it's easy. What gets tricky is if you push them at the same time, or if you push the first boss first, then it becomes very tight because you have to kill the Nexus, pick up the device, and then use it all within about 4 seconds, which practically speaking is not difficult. So again, key is kill the Nexus first, but very close to when you kill your first target. So the other thing that's going to happen here is we had the charged energy burst earlier, which is either red or white, or blue or white, I guess, since the red one looks kind of white. Anyway, once Overdrive mode goes out, and so again, whichever boss we're burning first, Aivela or Esne, the goal is we need to be able to interrupt that cast, but the other boss is going to finish their cast, which means that from that point on, anytime you get targeted by energy bursts, it could be Overdrive energy burst. It has similar kind of cooldown and similar mechanics, except for the fact that it's kind of an integrated, where it kind of matches both together, so it kind of looks blue and white and red. So it basically has both polarizations, so you can't mitigate it by matching the color. So all you can do is whoever gets it needs to get out of the group, and it hits for quite a bit harder as well. So you definitely want to use a defensive if you're not pretty high health. Okay, now we're going to see a live example. Now this actually is not going to be a successful pull, so you're both going to see kind of some of the elements of what you want to do, but you're also going to see what goes wrong, because again, the order in which you kill these things is important. Unfortunately, I don't ever tend to DPS. I usually tend to tank for our current prog team, and was tanking when we cleared all this, and so I only ever get to DPS when we're doing like setup runs for other teams that are working on it now versus our current team that's cleared it. So I'm on a melee DPS here for a setup run, and so again, the key here is I'm going to be on the Nexus, so I'm getting in the middle. I move out of the middle for the Purification beams, but otherwise I'm on the Nexus. I want to get it to around 10% or so, and then at that point I kind of want to hold off because we don't want to kill it early. It's happened before when the bosses are crossing that a ranged DPS will like hit a dot spread or like a chain lightning or some kind of an AoE or conal based ability that'll tick damage. And you don't want it so low that one of those little things, like spreading a few dots, will kill it. So 10%, 10% here is about, I've got it about 9, it's about right. And now then at that point I'm going to swap back to the boss. And so we're going to pick one of these two bosses to burn down. Now my assignment at this point, I'm on the far side of the room. I'm about to go back over and attack Aivela until we get both of them around 20%. And then in this particular case, we decided to burn Esne first. Doesn't matter who you burn first. Just make sure the team knows who it is. And so then when these two swap and Esne comes back over to us, we're just going to be burning her. And so the goal here is we really want to kill the Nexus when, in this case, Esne is about 9 to 10%. We want her close enough to 7 that after we kill the Nexus, we can push her to 7 before she finishes her cast, because once she hits 7 she's going to shield, which will interrupt the cast, and then she'll start it again, and that'll give the person who kills it, in this case me, plenty of time. So here we pushed her first, which is like the worst case. So now we have to kill the Nexus and then pick up the device, and like here I am trying to pick it up and I get it, and here I move and I'm actually a little slow, but it didn't matter because by the time that ability popped up she had less than 4 seconds left, and there was 4 seconds to cast it. So at that point, there was no way to break it in time. So I did break the shield, but Overdrive mode went out, so she got healed. So now she was at like 15% health. Plus, there's all these extra damage things going out, and we're just going to get nuked because it's so much damage. You just can't let that go out. So what did we do wrong? What we should have done was slowed up DPS on Esne or swapped to the Nexus a little bit faster and kill the Nexus first, and then we'd have been fine. Okay, so now we're going to see it live, and I'm not the one that is handling the Nexus here, unfortunately, but maybe that's to the good, because it actually goes really smoothly here. Again, I'm usually tanking, as you'll see here from this POV. So again, we want to burn these two fairly evenly until we get to 20%. We're following the mechanics. We still have to pick up countermeasures. So tanks, when they can use their AoE taunts, should help. DPS otherwise pick theirs up. Once we get to the point where we burn one of these down, or once we focus all our DPS on one boss, pretty much the one tank on the other side is going to be kind of on their own a bit. At that point, they should be the one to pick up the countermeasures on that side as often as they can. And it's also worth noting, once you push the first boss to 7%, at that point remote access goes away, so you don't have to do tank swaps. So then at that point, the other tank, actually both tanks, can more freely use their taunts to help grab aggro on the countermeasures, which can be helpful. But here we go. So we're getting them low. We're going to kill the Nexus first, which is what we want to do. So there, we killed the Nexus. Esne was at like 8 or 9%, so we're pretty easily going to push her. So there, you see, she started to cast Overdrive mode, but then it was interrupted. Now she starts casting it again, and we've got plenty of time. We easily interrupt it by breaking the shield. Now we're just going to kill Esne. Now note, Aivela did shield. Aivela is going to finish her cast. But because of the timing, she's not actually going to. So she's just now casting Overdrive mode, and so she does finish the cast. But the timing worked out really well, where we didn't take too much damage, and so now all we've got left is Aivela. Now, part of the reason why you want to leave the other boss a little higher is because no matter what you do, you're going to have some downtime for damage, and so anyway, we wait till the cooldown timer expires on the Disruption Pulse device, then we use it to break her shield again, and then we just burn her down. We just have to keep people alive. As long as you get the first boss down cleanly the first time, usually you're in pretty good shape for a clear. Nothing squirrely happens. So there you go. Nice. All right, thanks everyone. I hope this video was helpful for you. I think we've covered pretty much everything from start to finish on the mechanics. Again, the Purification beam phase and the burn phase, and timing the kill, getting the Nexus, coordinating the Nexus, getting it where you want, who's going to handle the Nexus, getting coordinating that push so that you push the boss, and then you kill the Nexus, and then you break the shield. Like, all that is going to be the two keys to success. Hope this is helpful. I know it's kind of long. Make sure to use the chapter links down below in the description to help navigate. This is a long video, and most of the time you'll just need to brush up on a few things. But I hope this is helpful to you. Best of luck in Gods from the Machine. It's a really, really fun operation. In fact, the Nahut, the boss after this, is probably one of my very, very favorites. A&E's a lot of fun too. So best of luck, and thanks for watching. Thanks. Bye.
Your judgment. Your life is mine. Hunger for their power! desire to win. No, you will fail. Cannot be weaker than a mortal. Your passion